Okay. Management and leadership in today's organization. So that's what we are learning about today. We will talk about the role of management. Why do we need managers? And what do they actually do? Did you ever wonder about that? We'll talk about the 4 functions of management. That is a concept you'll find in any college course about management. In fact, if you're a business major and you transfer to a 4-year university, you'll probably, as a business major, take a course in management. And you will hear the same thing we're going to learn here, that there are 4 functions of management. They are planning, leading, organizing, and controlling. Okay? Those are the 4 things that managers do. We'll learn how their roles change in different organizational settings. We'll learn what skills are necessary to be an effective manager or leader. By the way, those are different things. They're related. Managers can be leaders and leaders can be managers, but they're not exactly the same thing. We'll talk about that difference. And we'll look at trends related to management and leadership as well. Right? Let me ask, is anyone here currently a manager or ever been a manager? Yeah? Okay. Anybody else? Okay.
She has.
Who? Oh, Adriana. Okay. So for those who have been a manager, how did you like that experience? Good? What do you think?
I didn't like it.
Okay, we have a yes and a no. Liked and didn't like. Well, what did you not like about it, Adriana?
Well, you obviously have someone above you, and I think she didn't have like enough discipline. She wasn't organized, and she had other people do like things that she should like learn how to do.
Okay.
So she just didn't have like the requirements, like for me, for her to be like above anybody. That was just it.
Okay, well, that's a great point. So a worker is basically not a manager, right? So workers usually have a manager that they report to, but that manager typically reports to some manager above them. And depending on how big the organization is, there could be 10 or more layers of management. So it's hard sometimes to be a manager because you've got responsibilities that you have to take care of in terms of the people that report to you, but then you also have to report to somebody who maybe is not a good manager, not an effective manager, or sees things differently than you. And so you're kind of stuck in between these other layers of the organization. And it could be a very uncomfortable situation. What was it you liked about being a manager? Okay, so you have more power and authority, and when things are going well, that feels really good, right? It's nice to see happy employees, happy customers, everybody getting things done, right? That's a really good feeling. So management has pros and cons, and we'll learn more about that. Okay, so let's start off here with defining what management is in the first place. Can you imagine an organization with no managers? What would happen? Chaos? It could be. In general, managers help keep things organized. If you remember, that was one of the 4 functions of management, was keeping things organized. So yeah, without managers, things might be chaotic. If it's a very small organization, it might be able to do well just without managers and just people working together. But that's pretty rare. Most organizations do use management because it really helps keep things organized. Okay. Let's talk about this, the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. So in an organization, what does it mean to be efficient? Sorry, maximum,
or like you have very high output to.
okay, very high output to input. So you're taking your inputs, which could be things like materials, labor, money, whatever you're using to make your product. And with a small amount of inputs, you're able to produce a large amount of product. That would be efficiency because you're not wasting time, you're not wasting money, you're not wasting materials or energy. So yes, efficiency is all about being able to produce in large quantities with minimal waste. Or even if it's in small quantities, minimal waste, okay? So that's what efficiency is. Now, here's another word though, effectiveness. What does it mean for an organization to be effective? Yes, sir.
I would say like how long it takes them and how they do it.
How they do it. Can you elaborate more on what you're thinking?
Like, I would say doing it in a way where, I mean, also considering time as well, like efficiency.
Okay.
Yeah, just a lot of time.
Yes, sir.
So efficiency is how they do it. This is like the outcome of it.
Okay. So effectiveness would have to do with the outcome. True. Let's say you've got a company that's producing sneakers, okay? And they can crank out, let's say, 1,000 pairs of sneakers every day because they're very efficient. They're really good at making sneakers. But nobody's buying their sneakers because they're not well designed or they're not the right color or for whatever reason. Then yeah, they're being efficient, but they're not being very effective because they're not doing what they should be doing. It says here effectiveness is doing the right things. It can relate to the quality of their output. Maybe they're making great sneakers, but they fall apart. So customers buy them, but they bring them back the next day, right? That also would not be very effective. So you really want a combination. As an organization, you want to operate efficiently with minimal waste, but you also want to make sure you're making the right product. Right? You're being effective as well. You could also think of it as you can produce in large quantities, but you're also meeting quality expectations by giving people what they want, meeting their quality needs, okay? So that is a dynamic that exists really in all organizations. Have you ever had a job where your boss thought you needed to work faster? Has that ever happened to anybody? So they were concerned about efficiency, right? They wanted you to have higher quantity of output. And maybe in your mind, you were saying, I could work faster, but then I'm going to make mistakes. I'm not going to be producing as good of a product. And so you're worried about not being effective enough, right? And so really you want to do both because when an organization can do both, it thrives. If you can make products with minimal waste and it's exactly what people want, you have a very successful business, right? On the other hand, if you can only do one or the other, you're going to struggle. And if you can't do either, your organization's not going to last, right? So that's all important for managers to keep in mind. How can we meet quality expectations and quantity expectations? How can we be both efficient and effective? So I mentioned to you there are 4 functions of management. Here they are. Planning really has to do with thinking about the future. Things like, how many customers are going to want to buy our product? Because then you know how much you need to produce, which tells you how much material you need to buy, how many employees you need, right? So thinking about the future and preparing for it is planning. Then you organize the work and you decide, okay, this person is going to do this job and this person will do that job. You need to train people. We need to get the materials delivered on a particular date. That's all organizing so that there's no chaos. And leading has to do with inspiring and motivating people to do the best job that they can. Then we get to controlling, and controlling has to do with looking at what's happened already to make sure you're on track. So for example, looking at how much the company produced yesterday to say, okay, did we produce enough? And did we meet the quality expectations? If we're not in control, how do we get it back into control? Okay, so planning is looking towards the future. Organizing and leading have to do with the present. And then controlling has to do with looking at your past performance to make sure you're on track. And these are the 4 functions of management. Right. What questions or comments are out there? Somebody's got a question, I'm sure.
Will this be on the test?
Will this be on the test? The chapter quiz?
Yeah.
Yes, it will cover these concepts because the PowerPoints that I use are based on the chapter, even though sometimes I add in additional stuff. So what we cover here in the lecture is going to be what's covered in the chapter quiz. You'll often see questions on the chapter quiz that we did not talk about because I can't cover every thing that's in the chapter, right? We don't have enough time, which is why you want to be reading the chapter in the textbook. But yes, these concepts will be on the quiz, which means they'll also be on the midterm and the final too. Other question? Okay. Was that a question? No? Okay. Let's cover another slide or two, maybe just this one slide, and then I'll show you that video. So this textbook is about 5 or 6 years old. A lot has changed in the last 5 or 6 years. That's part of why I try to add additional information to keep things more current. But this page is a little bit outdated because it's talking about Twitter. And Twitter is actually officially no longer called Twitter, right? What's the new name? X. It's now X, right? But some people still call it Twitter. And that goes back to Elon Musk, right? Because he put a lot of money into the company, billions of dollars, some of his own money, but some from other investors, so that he could control the company and take it over and transform it, which he has done. I've never been much of a Twitter user myself. It never really appealed to me personally to go on Twitter. I just didn't have the time for it personally. But some people love Twitter because it allows them to communicate information in very short messages, right? As opposed to other social media where you can post long messages. But Twitter has always been just very short. Now, it's transformed a lot. So some of this information might be outdated, but at the time of the writing of this textbook, Twitter's mission statement was apparently to give everyone the power to create and share ideas and information instantly without barriers. If you think about social media companies, that's basically what they do, right? They give people the ability to share information around the world. Anywhere with an internet connection, you can participate in social media, right? Unless it's blocked by your country, maybe North Korea or someplace like that. But most of the world can communicate through these social media platforms. So let's think about what is a mission statement? Why does a company even need one? So who can answer that? What is a mission statement? Or, yes, go ahead.
Basically like the goal and the values of the.
Okay, the goal and values of the business. Very good. I'm not 100% sure. Is your name Jaden? Okay, good. It's gonna take me a while trying to get everybody's names. Okay, good point, Jaden. It's the purpose, the goals of the company, as it says here, the mission statement. This is according to the textbook, should identify the purpose of the company, its values, and the actions that it takes. Now, companies don't have to have a mission statement, but if they do, they can actually put whatever they want. Okay, but according to the textbook, it should have these three elements. Well, Twitter's mission statement is fairly short. It does talk about the purpose of the organization, but they have a separate statement that talks about their values. It says they think every voice has the power to impact the world. And we've seen Twitter be used to have major impacts, to organize protests against governments in different parts of the world. So it has allowed people to exercise their voice and share their opinions on a very large scale. And then as far as the actions that Twitter takes, a company's strategy is its long-term plan, okay? Strategy is a long-term plan. And then it has to put that plan into action. And according to Twitter, their strategy has been to have the best information sharing platform and top revenue around the world. And that's something that they, I would say, haven't achieved, but they're working towards. Of course, Elon Musk has kind of taken them backwards, where they've lost a lot of users, but that's a whole different story. So, companies have a mission. All companies have a mission, which is a purpose, but not all companies actually write a mission statement to identify their purpose. It's a good idea, I think, to make it clear what your mission is. Some companies also create a vision statement, which is similar. A vision statement talks about what the company wants to achieve in the future. The mission statement is the current purpose, and the vision statement is what they hope to achieve in the future. Andrew?
Mission statements in general are usually part of a business plan.
It is typically included in a business plan. Yes, that's right. So every company gets to decide, do we want to have a mission statement? Do we want to have a vision statement? And do we want to have both? And the reason it's important is it gives a clear purpose to the employees and the managers so that they can all work towards that same purpose. If at Twitter, there were some managers who were working towards a different purpose, the rest of the company is working towards this purpose, that's going to create conflict, right? You want everybody focused on the same mission, following the same values, implementing the same strategy. That unity makes the organization more successful. Okay, so you'll see a lot of management and leadership comes back to having a clear mission. Okay, and then organizing everybody towards that mission. Any questions or comments at this point? Okay, so I'm going to show you this video by Simon Sinek. I think you'll find it to be thought-provoking. So tell me, in your view, what does that video have to do with the company's mission?
Pretty much everything.
Okay, can you elaborate, Andrew?
Just because what they believe in as a company is the biggest point, I guess, what he was expressing.
Okay, the mission is the purpose of the company, right? So if you have a mission statement that conveys that purpose, like he said, Apple's mission was to challenge the status quo. I don't know if that's their mission statement, but that was how they operate. That was what they believe. Challenge the way everybody else is doing things and come up with a better way. And I think you can agree that's Apple. They just launched this VR headset. What was it called? Vision Pro? Vision Pro. So if you've got an extra $3,500 to spend and you want to walk around with virtual reality goggles that allow you to see virtual reality while you also see real reality, they call it augmented reality. You might want to pick up a pair, but it's different. Other companies have come up with similar products. Other companies had smartphones, but Apple did it differently. They did it with their users in mind, and that's why their products are so popular. So yes, the mission of the company, its purpose, if that is clearly communicated, not just to the employees, but to the customers as well, everybody's working towards that purpose. Every Apple product owner gets it, and that's why they bought an Apple product. Every Apple employee, every Apple manager gets it. They know that Apple is the world leader in creating consumer electronics that are creative, groundbreaking, and exciting, right? So that purpose is critical. As Simon Sinek said, people don't buy what you do. What did he say? They buy why you do it. Any questions? Any comments? It is. I've seen it so many times, and I always get more out of it because he brings up a lot of really good points. Okay, so I told you there are 4 functions of management, right? What were those 4 functions? Do you remember any of the 4? Organizing, planning, controlling, and leading. Exactly. So let's talk about planning a little bit. Planning happens at different levels of the organization. So the strategic level happens primarily among the top management or the executives. They have to think out many years into the future. And do we need to build extra factories? Do we need mass hiring? What are some of the large things we need to plan for to prepare for the future? That's the strategy. Tactics would be shorter term in nature, maybe just within a couple years. And they're thinking about things like, and this is middle management oftentimes making these decisions, but what are the things we need to do to support that strategy? For example, if we're going to build a new factory, part of the tactic is going to be figuring out where that factory should be located and how big it should be, right? So these tactical decisions help plan for the strategy. But then we have some operational level planning, which sometimes involves even the supervisors. And this is very short term, maybe less than a year. It would be things like, okay, we have 10 job openings. Let's post those jobs and start interviewing candidates. Or we need to increase production next month. Let's order some extra materials. Okay, so the operational plans support the tactical plans, which support the long-term strategic plans. All right, any questions or comments on that? Now, those are 3 types of planning, but I think I told you there are 4 types. The 4th type is a contingency plan. So what do you think a contingency plan is?
An emergency plan.
Backup? Okay.
Emergency plan.
Yeah, it's what you could do if
If something's
something goes
happening.
wrong, right? It's a plan B or plan C. Or it might even be, what if a certain opportunity comes up? Like maybe, actually, we can apply this in your own lives. Maybe your operational plan is to come here to class, do your homework, right? So you can pass the class, which is a tactic to help you get your degree, which would be part of your strategy, right? And maybe that strategy also involves getting into a 4-year university. Maybe your first choice is, let's just say, I was going to say UC Berkeley, but because it's considered the best of the UC schools. But actually, I know of quite a few people who went to Berkeley and didn't like it for whatever reason. So how about I'll say UC Santa Cruz? Let's say your top choice is you want to get into UC Santa Cruz. Everybody I know who went to UC Santa Cruz liked it. So, but maybe you also apply to some other places too, right? And maybe you don't really think you're going to get into UC Santa Cruz for whatever reason. So you're planning to go to CSUMB. But a contingency might be, well, what if I actually do get accepted to UC Santa Cruz? What if this opportunity comes up that I don't think is going to happen, but maybe it could? So a contingency plan is when you plan for something that might happen, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. And that way, if it does happen, you're prepared because you've already thought about it and made plans. Now, can we plan for every contingency? Every possible thing that could come up? No, that would not be possible, right? Because life is too uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen. You can't plan for everything. So then how do you decide which contingencies you should plan for?
Process of elimination.
Okay.
Try and find the best possible routes that are most viable, I guess.
Okay. So what's most viable? What are the best possible routes?
Or efficient or.
Efficient and effective. Okay. So think about what are those things that could happen that would have the greatest impact and are most likely to happen. Right? So if you didn't apply to Harvard, you're not going to get into Harvard. You don't have to have a contingency plan because you didn't even apply, right? But if you did apply to UC Santa Cruz, well, you might want to think about what if I actually get in? Because that would have a major impact on your studies and your career. And it is a reasonable possibility, right? So have contingency plans for those things that are most likely to happen and could have the biggest impact. All right. So these are 4 levels of, or 4 types of planning. Any questions or comments? As this says, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. You might have heard that before. I did not make it up. Do you feel that that's true? If you don't have a plan, you can just expect that you're going to fail? Yes. I think it is a good general rule, especially in business. Sometimes you get lucky, right? Sometimes you don't have a plan or you don't have a good plan and things just work out, and that's great. But if you're going to put your time and energy and money into starting a business or having a career, you might want to at least have a plan, right? Think it through. And it's okay that maybe your plan doesn't work out the way you thought it would. They usually don't, so you need to be flexible. But having a plan gives you a direction and is probably going to lead to better outcomes than not having a plan. There are some entrepreneurs who've been very successful who will tell you they don't believe in business plans because you just need to be able to adapt every day, see what's happening and make a decision. And that could work. But I think for most people, having that plan, thinking through like you all did when you went to Startup Factory, thinking through what is the purpose of my business? What is my product or service? Do people really want to buy it? How much should we charge? Who should we sell it to? These are all really important questions. And if you haven't thought it through, you're more likely to make some mistakes, in my opinion. So generally, I would say have plans and just realize that those plans will evolve and have to be flexible over time. And I think you'll have better results than if you fail to plan. So let me do a time check here. So we talked about planning. Let's talk a little bit about organizing, and then we will break into groups for the video discussion. Organizing. One way to look at organizing, and really one way to look at management in general, is getting work done through other people. You ever notice managers are usually not actually doing the work, right? They're doing something else. Maybe you don't even know what they're doing. They're sitting in their office and you're wondering, are they just playing solitaire all day? And there are some managers that do that. But a lot of times they're busy organizing. What might go into organizing and getting work done through other people? What does that involve? Maybe scheduling, deciding when people need to come to work, hiring and training, evaluating performance, ordering materials to make sure they arrive on time. All of these things might be part of the manager's job to keep things organized so that work is getting done through the workers. Right? If they're on the front line and they're doing the work, then who's organizing? Right? So the manager needs to be able to organize so other people can do the work. And as we discussed before, there is this balance between quality and quantity. You need to be able to produce efficiently, but also make sure you're meeting quality expectations, so you're being effective. Oh yes, and managers are also organized into a hierarchy within the organization. At the top of the organization, especially in a corporation, you might find the CEO and these other job titles. So somebody tell me what CEO stands for?
Chief Executive Officer.
Exactly, the Chief Executive Officer. They are typically, in a corporation, the employee with the highest level of authority. Okay, even though they're not a worker, they are still an employee, and they oversee the entire organization. Now, they do report to a board of directors who can fire the CEO, so they don't have absolute power. But they're the ones that are there managing the company every day, and they're responsible. Now, reporting to the Chief Executive Officer, you might have some other chiefs. So they're also called chiefs, but they don't have quite as much power. Who can tell me what CFO stands for? Yes, Chief Financial Officer. How about COO?
Operations.
Yes, Chief Operations Officer. How about CIO? Information, Chief Information Officer. So companies don't have to use these job titles, but they are fairly common. And these are some of the executives. You might also find a president in a company. Typically, if there is a president, the president reports to the CEO. There might even be multiple presidents. It's really up to however the company wants to structure its business. I don't know about this governor job title. I'm guessing that might be a British thing because I've never heard of that within a business, having a governor or general director. That is something you might find. Now, in middle management, you typically see titles like manager or director. And then at the lower level of management, you'll see supervisor, maybe foreman in a construction environment. You might see team leader, but from my experience, a team leader is not technically a manager. They're an employee, they're a worker with a little bit more responsibility, but still considered a worker. So it really just depends on the organization, but as you see, management is organized into these different levels, right? And again, these folks create the strategy, these folks create the tactical plan, and these folks create the operational plans. Typically. We've talked about planning, we've talked about organizing. Does anybody have questions? No? All right, we'll go ahead and get into your groups of 4 or more, okay? And then we'll start our video discussion. Okay, we've talked about planning, we've talked about organizing, let's talk a little bit about leading. So there are three basic leadership styles. And in this graphic, we see them depicted here with autocratic being one extreme. So what does it mean to be an autocrat?
Demanding?
Okay, demanding, what's that? A dictator, yes, somebody who just says, do this, my way or the highway, okay? That is one leadership style. You might have had managers like that before. The opposite of that is laissez-faire, which is a French word, has something to do with freedom. So a laissez-faire leadership style is basically just letting people do whatever they want to do. You don't find that too often in organizations, right? It's much more common to find an autocratic leader than a laissez-faire leader. Now, in between those is democratic leadership. And in that approach, the leader asks for information and input from the followers, and then uses that information and input to try to make better decisions. So it's a more democratic process. It doesn't mean necessarily everybody gets to vote, but at least they get to have their voice heard. So even though it shows that being on the side, it's really in between the autocratic leader who makes decisions without any input, and the laissez-faire leader who doesn't even make decisions and just lets people run around, right? Which of these three approaches do you think is the best leadership style?
I'd say autocratic.
Autocratic? They get things done.
Yeah.
Autocratic leaders often get promoted because they're results oriented. They're very efficient. What's the potential problem with autocratic leaders?
You're not always right.
Yeah.
They're not always right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And more-
Their way is not
More
necessarily the
ways to
best
do what they
way.
want. Mhm.
And they have a hard time inspiring people because they're bullies, you know, they just tell people what to do. And so then the employees might quit or might just not perform well because they're not inspired. So in some cases, autocratic leadership is appropriate. And in some cases, maybe the laissez-faire approach might be appropriate. But in general, I think somewhere in the middle, a more democratic approach is more appropriate in most organizations. People want their voice to be heard. They want their manager to listen to them, even if the manager doesn't agree, to at least listen, right? So these are three leadership styles. Any questions or comments on those three leadership styles? Nope. All right, so let's spend 1 minute talking about types of power. There are 5 types of power. Legitimate power you have because of your job title. So just by being a manager or supervisor, that gives you certain power. Reward power means you can get people to do things by promising them a reward. And coercive power means you can get people to do things by threatening them. So you have to be careful with that, right? And not abuse that power. There's also expert power, where you have power over people just because you're so skilled or so knowledgeable that they look to you as a leader. And then referent power means you have power over people because they like you. And so they will follow you just for that reason. So all 5 of these are types of power, and the only one that requires being a manager is legitimate power. So think about that. We'll go into more detail on Thursday. All right? See you then.
What do we have to do? What do we do?